my 18, and through my 18 I kind of went down another new road of a new kind of genre opened up to me, and that was of noir fiction. And with noir fiction I mean the Hap&Leonard series by Joe R. Lansdale. This is again not the first book, this is actually a collection of short stories in the series. All you need to remember is Joe R. Lansdale, Hap&Leonard. I also binge watched the series on Amazon, which is so good. It's so good. If you don't want to read the books, the series is so good. This is the story of Hap, 40 years old, white man who lives, I believe, I think in Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken, and they basically is just doing manual jobs and surviving after his wife left him. And then you got his best friend Leonard, and Leonard is this gay black man, and he is amazing. I love Leonard so much, and they've got this very weird friendship where Leonard is often picked up and discriminated, and they get in a lot of fights, and then they resolve murder mystery. And the first book, the chaos starts when Hap's ex-wife comes back in their life and asks them to help her new husband to rob a bank. And it's a noir fiction. You got all the goodness of amazing writing, very sassy writing with action and just weird stories. I cannot recommend Hap&Leonard enough. And at the time I went back to historical fiction a little bit, and I read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, and I fell in love with it. I remember that her writing particularly hit me hard, like how amazing was her writing, and the story, and Jamie. Just, yes, I definitely wanted a Scottish Highlander for myself at the time, but the twist and the story and the writing, because these are huge books that I remember just reading them and then just devouring them, despite the fact they were so dense. I think it was all thanks to her writing style, and it kind of pulled me back into historical fiction, even if there is a hint of magic there. So I'm always going to be thankful to Outlander. However, these days I'm just following the series. I'm not gonna continue with the series. I think I read the first 5 books in the series, and then I chose to watch the TV show because it's so good anyway, then continue on the series. But I will always be grateful to Outlander. And I didn't forget though about vampires at all, and I became obsessed with the R.J.R. Ward series, the Black Dagger Brotherhood series. This is again a random book in the series. I think it's just kind of a companion book, so it's not even one of the books. I do own the books in here, but they're all Italian, so I might put a cover here, just more appropriate probably, and I absolutely love them so much. And these are a brotherhood of handsome, massive fighters who are vampires who fight other kind of creatures. And I remember, because a few years before I'd watched Blade, this kind of reminded me of what A Bunch of Blades, the movie, put together would be. It's erotic at the same time, there's explicit sex in it, and there is action. But I was there because of these awesome vampires, I have to say. I was definitely there for the romance most of all, and each one of the brothers in the Brotherhood has their own story, and then probably a sequel. And you start with the story of the king who finds their mate. It's very primal animal instincts that these vampires have, but at the time I was definitely into it, and that started the whole erotica vampire. So it's not just love, but it's about vampire having sex, which I'm not into that much these days, but definitely at 18 I was. And then we hit my 20s, and that's the time when I start another genre which I kind of became passionate about, even if it was kind of short-lived. And these were the books in the Beat Generations, and these are really weird books because they're usually written by people with addiction going on crazy adventures and just be very weird and definitely not conforming to society. So I remember that I went to Barcelona and then Madrid. I had this big holiday and I spent 5 days in Barcelona and 5 days in Madrid, and through my time there I was reading On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and I fell in love with this. One of my ultimate dreams would be to kind of take a car and go in each state in USA, kind of do a huge road trip. And this is what this is about. It's about Jack Kerouac's story of him traveling through USA, being completely drunk and out of his mind, and just his adventure. And I loved this so much, and it kind of inspired me even more to one day realize that dream without me being miserable and drunk all the time, how it was. But I remember being very fascinated by the big generation and all these authors. I remember that he wrote these, and I think this is actually the copy I have. There are no paragraphs. Like, he typed these on a typewriter, and there are no chapters, no paragraphs, and he didn't just separate it. He presented this to the publisher like a huge manuscript without kind of coherence in it and without much structure. And yet I love this so much. It felt like reading about freedom, although I would take it differently. I would not massacre my body while doing it, but it's definitely a staple in my life. And that's when I hit 21 years old. And at 21 is when I decided that I didn't want to study Oriental languages anymore, but I wanted to actually study forensic psychology. And the reason why I became interested in forensic psychology was because I just moved to London a few months before. I was like poor as fuck, and I remember going to this shop of used books, and they would sell every book for £1. And I picked up this forensic book. It was about 38 cases of people that were condemned to death and they were actually innocent, and that kind of had a huge impact on me. And then I remember thinking, but what about the people who actually do these things, actually kill people? And that started the whole journey that got us to here today, many years later, with me struggling through a forensic psychology master after graduating a couple of years ago. So at the time when I was still researching and deciding, I remember coming across The Jigsaw Man by Paul Britton. Paul Britton is a clinical psychologist that's actually, for the most part, working in forensic psychology. He's one of the few forensic psychology that actually collaborated on serial murder cases in UK with the police, and that's his story. And I think there are a couple of books, so I read both of them. I loved both of them, and he is the reason why I went on and decided to be a forensic psychologist. So saying that this book changed my life is, again, minimizing the reality of this. I was so fascinated by his insight into human minds and deviant human minds, and I was like, I want to be you. How can I get there? And so I started studying forensic psychology, did my undergrads, and now I'm finishing my postgraduates the end of August, hopefully. But it's been a journey since then, and I am grateful. It's been a struggle, but I'm also grateful. And hopefully one day I can say that I'm doing something similar to Paul Britton. And then I hit my 22 years, and 22 years was a year where I was just starting university. And I remember that one day I was just in a charity shop again, picked up The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, and I read this in a few hours, became obsessed, went on to watch the movie, which I cried as much as I cried in the book. Very sad as F contemporary books. From there I actually moved to young adult books, and I was still 22 at the time, and I read Beautiful Disaster by Jamie Maguire. I also read by Abby Glyn's series, but between the two I think this book impacted me the most. And again, I don't want to get into the controversy of how the relationship in here is toxic and it doesn't represent what someone should accept in a relationship. I'm not here to do any of those speeches this time. I'm just here telling you my story in books. That's it. And this is the story of a bad boy who falls in love with a very good girl, and their relationship is just, it opened the new world of new adult for me, which I don't read anymore now. I don't enjoy anymore now. I think I've became obsessed at the time, read too many very bad ones, and just gave it up for now. I might go back to romance book in the future, who knows? At the moment I'm not into romance, but I would be denying a huge part of my life saying that this didn't start my love for new adult romance books, because it did, and I've read so many of them after this. And on the same trend of actually reading very dramatic YA books, I also have to mention, just very briefly, Forbidden, which is the story of these two siblings who have a very dysfunctional childhood and they fall in love, and this is tragic, but I remember I was very hooked about these, and I researched after, and I was just fascinated with this kind of story after reading this. I have read, when I was 22, Rebecca. Rebecca is gothic fiction. It's best. It's a story of this woman who's never named, who marries this rich man. For him is the second marriage. He takes her to his mansion, I think in England, in some place in countryside, And when she gets there, she realizes that his ex-wife, before she has disappeared, she's just very much alive in the minds of the servants and people living in the city and living in the house, and she has to find out what's going on. And saying that this was fascinating, gripping, amazingly written, one of, again, the best books I've ever come across in the genre, especially, would be downplaying this book. Love this, and started my passion for gothic fiction. Kind of reignited it, I should say, probably, but definitely put me down in me looking actively for this kind of books after reading Rebecca. And then from gothic we get to finally horror. I would not say that back then, when I was 22/23, I was obsessed by horror as I am today, but I have to say that this started it all, and that's The Shining by Stephen King. So this is, to these days, probably my favorite Stephen King. I despise the movie, that's a whole new topic. And this is the story of this little boy who moves in a hotel because his father becomes the caretaker of the hotel for the summer or winter time when the hotel is closed to the public. And he is creepy as F, and weird things are going on. And this book terrified me in a couple of places. I was glued to the pages. If you like Stephen King, it's a staple book, and it kind of started me being interested in more horror-ish books. I think this YA phase of fantasy, urban fantasy slash, started from when I was around 23, late 23, to, well, I think around a couple of years ago, a year ago, I was more obsessed. To this day, I still read some of them, I still love some of them, but it's not as intense as it was years. And I could not start without mentioning Lux series by Jennifer R. Armentrout. Alien, this girl, she goes to high school, she falls in love with this boy, and this boy is an alien. I actually love these covers as well. Love the series. Probably would not love it now, but back then I was obsessed. And then, of course, I just briefly mentioned Throne of Glass. The thing that really made me love this was the third book, not the first two. And then I've got the second book in my hands, but actually the thing that started the whole obsession with fairy tales and all of that, it's the A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I know that's book again, it's controversial, and then we move on, and I loved the whole trilogy a lot, but that first book opened a new world of fairies and fairy sex and romance and all of that. And then we get into the more dark, grim fantasy with Nevernight. The series was okay, but I think overall the first book will always kind of remain in my heart as a sassy book, a sassy fantasy I always loved. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Grim, dark fantasy to its best, the last phase, and it's still going strong. Let's start on Light Note, which is one of the best comic fantasy apart from the Disco War series that I've read, which is the series by T.J. Klune. This is the first book. This is the second book I'm holding in my hands. I have still to read the third and fourth book and finish the series. This is the story of this wizard who's in love with the captain of the guards, and the captain of the guards is betrothed to the would-be king of the kingdom that our wizard is set to protect. So yeah, we'll have to become, and is training to become, the wizard of this prince slash future king, which is supposed to marry the man he's in love with. And there is a gay unicorn as his best friend, and a giant, and this is one of the most funny, hysterical books you'll ever come across. It's full of sexual innuendos, though. It's full of jokes, maybe not for everybody, but this is a staple. It has been a staple since I read it. It's just one of the books that made me cry because I was laughing so much. Love the characters, love the story, diversity at its best. I loved it. And then we got the horror. I became obsessed with horror, and it started, yes, with The Shining, but it became very solid after I read Mo Hyder, The Devil of Nanking. This is taken from a real event, which is the massacre of Nanking that happened in China. And this is the story of this girl who was chasing video footage of that massacre, and she gets in a lot of trouble to get it. This is for adults and not for every adult. It is one of the most upsetting. I was shaking and crying like a baby at the end, and not because I was laughing. I was genuinely upset. This book made me want to throw up in more than one place, and still it stuck to me. It changed the way I read, it changed my taste in horror, and it was so shocking and yet so well crafted that to these days is one of the books that upset me the most, and I should probably hate it, and instead I love it, love it, love it so much. And this started a new whole thing, and I became obsessed with horror and these kind of stories after reading these. I've never found something as good as this so far. But what I did after reading that book, which I just threw on the floor and I shouldn't have done, I feel guilty now. Anyway, I've done a challenge called Reading the Most Disturbing Books Ever Written, just because I read that and I was like, how can it be anything more disturbing than that? Spoiler alert, I didn't find anything more disturbing than that, but a close one, Hunted by Palahniuk. Yes, I read Fight Club by him, but this is my favorite Czech. Palahniuk. Loved this. This is a satire on reality TV show, and you've got this bunch of characters, around 10 of them, that have to be recluse in a house for whatever reason I don't remember. And each one of them is a very peculiar character who's going to tell you a story about who they are and how they became who they are and why they got the name they have. They don't use personal names. They all have these weird names that make a lot of sense if you hear the origin story. And this is freaking disturbing, disgusting, whatever you want to call it. Amazing, love this. And I think I read this because of that challenge I did. I'll link it up below again. And it was my favorite book in that challenge, and definitely one of the most disturbing. Although not the most disturbing one, but you can watch the challenge for that. But that's a book that I will love forever. And I'm gonna finish this very long video and my story with what I've read when I was around 26, 27 years old, I don't remember exactly. And the book that to this day is probably my ultimate book, favorite book ever, at the same time with Game of Thrones saga. It's The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is the story of this author who disappears, and there is a very dark history behind his disappearance. It's not clear why or what happened to him, and we've got this very young boy who goes around Barcelona to try and find what happened to this author who has become obsessed with. And I don't want to say anything else writing wise. This is one of the best books I've ever read. As you can see, I took a few quotes from this book. The story, the writing, the setting, I would not change one punctuation mark, one sentence from this book. This book is perfection. It's at the top of my favorite books ever, and I will love and cherish and push down this to other people throw forever. People have recommended this to and they have read it, they have loved it. The sequels, not so great so far, but I've not read them all. But this is gonna be forever, like in my pantheon of books. And this changed me and me as a potentially future author, who I want to be and what kind of author and writing style and stories. I wish I could replicate at least a fifth of his magic of what he can do, especially in this book. So I will stop this with The Shadow of the Wind and me being 25, 26 years old. And since then, in the last very few years, I've not read anything that have shaped me the way these books have. However, this year we might have one, but I don't want to spoil anything for my end of the year favorite books. Maybe you'll know if it's gonna become one of my ultimate favorite books ever. Who knows? Take a guess. We'll see then. Thank you for watching. I would love to hear about your books that shaped your life and maybe get some very good recommendations. Thank you for watching. Take care. Ciao.